Can a simple engineering piece change the fate of a whole season? Ferrari has carried out secret trials in Mugello to validate a new suspension that could end the Achilles heel of the SF-25. What did they find? And why can this test change the entire direction of 2025? Let's discover it. The SF-25, the car with which Ferrari competes this 2025 season, has been a contrast machine. On the one hand, he has shown flashes of competitiveness, being able to fight in certain classifications and staying in the conversation by podiums. But on the other, he has exposed such a serious problem that he has conditioned his performance from the first Grand Prix. A poorly conceived rear suspension that prevents a constant and effective filming height under real dynamic conditions. The technical dilemma was internally baptized as the short blanket effect. To reduce the bottom wear, Ferrari had to raise the shooting height. But in doing so, the car lost up to 20 aerodynamic load points, which in Formula One is a competitive abyss. That loss affected traction, passage through curve and general efficiency. Basically, Ferrari had to choose between being fast or legal. Worse, the pull rod design of the rear suspension, an inherited architecture of the SF-24 but adapted for a more compact gearbox in 2025, turned out to be a source of instability. This configuration offered theoretical benefits of weight and aerodynamics, but when implemented in practice it showed a negative interaction with the subsequent axis loads, causing the most expected oscillation. In addition, when demanding minimum tolerances and extremely fine adjustments, it limited the operational margin of engineers during the race weekends. In simple words, the car was difficult to set up, unpredictable on track and limited in its future development. All this generated immense internal pressure. From the telemetry data to the reports of the pilots, each session reinforced the idea that Ferrari was fighting their own design. Charles Leclerc in particular mentioned in multiple meetings that the rear axle response was unpredictable when leaving high-speed curves, while Hamilton, with his most fluid style and dependent on aerodynamic balance, was frustrated by progressive instability in long stints. Both agreed on something: the car did not allow to attack constantly, and that left them defenseless in front of McLaren, Mercedes, and, in certain circuits, even before Red Bull. The solution devised by Ferrari is not a simple update. It is a complete reformulation of the rear axle of the SF-25, designed to correct a structural root defect. This radical response is the result of weeks of simulations, data analysis and internal tests, all with a clear objective: give SF-25 the ability to maintain a constant shooting height without compromising the integrity of the flat background or losing aerodynamic load in the process. The epicenter of this technical revolution has been placed in Mugello, a circuit that Ferrari knows perfectly and offers the ideal conditions to validate this transformation. High-speed curves, elevation changes, and a demanding vertical load that reproduces the most extreme conditions of the calendar. What will be tested in Mugello is not a mere adjustment, but a completely redesigned suspension, with new longer suspension arms, reconfigured geometries, and an internal cinematics readjusted. This new suspension has been conceived not only to improve the car's ability to maintain its stable platform, but also to soften its behavior on curbs, something that has been a recurring weakness in the SF-25 on tracks such as Silverstone and Suzuka. The redesign seeks that the car have a more progressive response to load changes, which would allow more precise control in slow and fast curves, improving traction and reducing the wear of the flat bottom. In addition, the new architecture has been optimized to integrate with an evolution of the gearbox system. Ferrari is experiencing with an even more compact box, which allows them to redirect aerodynamic flow cleaner towards the diffuser and the beam wing. This integration is critical. A poorly coupled suspension to the powertrain can generate interference that alter the balance of the car. The solution that Vasseur and his team are exploring promises not only to mitigate the original problem, but to open new aerodynamic development doors for the second half of the championship. But why Mugello? Because Ferrari needs real data. Simulations in the wind tunnel and CFD, computer fluid dynamics, have limitations. The dynamic car behavior under real track conditions with wind, asphalt temperature, and unpredictable side loads cannot be reproduced with total fidelity in virtual environments. In Mugello, Ferrari can record the body's oscillation, the efforts in the suspension arms, the temperature of the tires, and how all this affects the general balance of the car. The type of proof that they have prepared is part of what the FIA allows as filming day, but the reality is that the session has been designed as an undercover technical test. They can only travel 100 kilometers and use demonstration tires, but within that frame, Ferrari can install extra sensors, high-speed cameras, and specific telemetry systems to collect data that would be impossible to obtain in a race weekend. Frédéric Vasseur has been explicit in its intention to take a helm turn to the SF-25 project. This suspension is not only a technical improvement, but a symbol of its management, a forceful response to a structural failure that has put the performance of Ferrari at risk in 2025. The objective is Belgium, a risky decision, yes, but necessary. Ferrari is betting on all or nothing in an attempt to reconnect with the fight for the championship before it is mathematically late. The fate of a whole season can change in a single test. And that is exactly what is at stake for Ferrari with this test in Mugello. What is decided there, in a circuit closed to the public, far from the cameras on the weekends of Grand Prix, can define not only the competitive course of the SF-25, but also the internal balance of power within the team, the future development of the car, and, ultimately, its real ability to fight for the championship of builders and pilots in 2025. The pressure is absolute because Ferrari is not simply validating one more piece. He is playing his strongest letter, perhaps the last one, to stay in the battle against McLaren, Mercedes and Red Bull. That if this new suspension complies with the promised stability of filming height, reduction in the wear of the flat background and maintenance of aerodynamic load, Ferrari can start running without the invisible chains that have limited their performance from Bahrain. Currently, each setup must be an exercise of juggling between speed and durability, between aggressiveness in classification and caution in the race. That margin is so thin that even the most experienced engineers have been forced to adopt conservative approaches to avoid sanctions. Eliminating this restriction not only improves performance, but allows the team to make more aggressive strategic decisions in the race, experiment with broader tire windows and reduce dependence on ideal conditions to be competitive. This change also has a deep psychological component. Internally, both Charles Leclerc and Lewis Hamilton have been dealing with a car that does not respond as they expect. In Leclerc, this translates into constant frustration for not being able to attack as he did with SF-24. In Hamilton, the situation has been even more complex. Adapting to a new car philosophy in its first year with Ferrari, just to meet an unstable and unenforceable platform, it has delayed its full integration. An effective technical solution not only improves the car, but returns confidence. And in Formula One, trust is one of the most valuable assets. A pilot with faith in his car can stop later, take more risk, and find time where others only find limit. That's why Mugello matters so much. Because it is more than a test. It is a bifurcation point. If the new suspension works, it can reconfigure the competitive map of 2025 and allow Ferrari to enter the second half of the calendar with a final car finally complete, capable of fighting on equal terms. If it fails, the consequences will not only techniques. They will be strategic, sports, human, and perhaps irreversible. In modern Formula One, where the differences between glory and oblivion are measured in millimeters and milliseconds, a simple piece can make the difference between a successful season or a disappointing. The test in Mugello is not an isolated episode in Ferrari's technical calendar. It is a point of no return. An evaluation that will determine whether the SF-25 can finally leave behind its structural curse and transform into a truly competitive car, or if it will continue to be trapped in a spiral of technical limitations and forced decisions that will always keep it a step behind its direct rivals. Motorsport has changed deeply in the era of soil effect cars. It is no longer just about power, but about control. Control of height, air, of the forces that cross the chassis at more than 300 kilometers per hour. Teams such as McLaren and Mercedes have understood this and have worked in addresses that allow them to explore the limit without falling into technical penalties or compromising the stability of their pilots. Ferrari, until now, has been fighting to survive between provisional solutions and a platform that was never entirely predictable. But that could change if what is tested in Mugello meets what is projected in the simulation. If the new suspension works, Ferrari will not only improve its performance in the following careers, but can redirect technical resources towards the evolutionary development of the SF-25 with a more ambitious approach. They can redesign motor maps, refine more aggressive classification strategies, and consider tactical battles with greater freedom. But, above all, they can compete without fear. Because that has been one of the most expensive side effects of this limitation. Uncertainty. That feeling of not knowing if the car will endure, if the technical measures will be enough, if you can risk. Mugello can bury that fear. This episode also leaves a clear lesson. Performance is not just a matter of speed. It is a complex design, management, trust, and adaptation equation. In this sport, even the most structural errors can be corrected if there is will, resources, and, above all, brave decisions. Frédéric Vasseur is betting its credibility as a technical and sports leader in this solution. Not because he does not have other options, but because he understands that only a radical decision act can reconfigure Ferrari's narrative in 2025.